Emma Thompson, heiress to the Thompson empire, is suddenly thrust into the role of CEO after her father's sudden death. As she navigates the complexities of corporate leadership, she uncovers disturbing signs of financial discrepancies, employee unrest, and the eerie silence of trusted advisors. Determined to get to the truth, Emma goes undercover, adopting a new identity as Sarah Johnson, a secretary in the marketing department. What she discovers shakes her to the core. Her father's empire is crumbling from within. The conspiracy is deep, and the more she uncovers, the more dangerous it becomes. Will Emma expose the corruption before it's too late? But before we dive deeper into this gripping tale, let me know where you're watching this from in the comments below. And if you love the story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any upcoming chapters. Emma Thompson, 28, stood in the lavish penthouse that had once belonged to her late father, Richard Thompson. The sprawling skyline of New York stretched before her, yet the view that had once brought her peace now only stirred unease. A soft rain tapped against the windows as she stared out at the world she had inherited. The Thompson empire. Her father had built it from the ground up, a global conglomerate spanning everything from tech and manufacturing to hospitality and finance. At one point, Emma had imagined herself stepping into his shoes. But now, with his sudden death, that world felt foreign and dangerous. Since her father's passing 6 months ago, Emma had been thrust into the role of CEO. She had always known the company needed someone capable of steering it into the future, but she had never expected it to be her so soon. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on her shoulders. She had been prepared for the usual challenges, balancing profit margins, keeping investors happy, overseeing operations. But what she had not expected were the unsettling signs that had begun to emerge. Emma's internal thoughts. Emma's mind churned, her eyes tracing the raindrops sliding down the glass. Something's wrong here. I need to understand what's going on. But how? She knew something was off. Her father's trusted lieutenants, now her advisors, had become distant. Meetings with the board were tense, and the air was thick with the kind of silence that hinted at secrets being hidden in plain sight. Financial discrepancies were being swept under the rug, as if no one wanted to acknowledge the obvious red flags. The company was still profitable, yes, but at what cost? And the rumors of employee dissatisfaction, of corporate politics running amok, of betrayal at the highest levels, only added fuel to her growing anxiety. She pushed away from the window and walked toward her desk, where a pile of reports sat untouched. As the head of the company, it was her job to manage everything, yet there were days when she felt like an outsider in her own company. She had been trained for this. Her degree from Harvard Business School, her years of shadowing her father, the endless hours spent learning the ropes. Yet nothing could have prepared her for this. Emma's dialogue with William, her chief advisor. Emma glanced at the clock. 9:45 a.m. She had a meeting scheduled in 15 minutes with William Carter, her father's right-hand man for over a decade. William was old school, with sharp suits and an even sharper tongue. He had always been a staunch defender of the company, but recently his behavior had started to worry her. "William," Emma said, picking up the phone to call him, "can you come up to my office in 10 minutes? I need to discuss something with you." On the other end, William's voice crackled through. "Of course, Miss Thompson. I'll be there shortly." Emma put the phone down with a sigh, her fingers tapping nervously on the wooden surface of the desk. William was always the voice of reason, but recently, even he had seemed distant. His advice increasingly more vague, his assurances less confident. Emma had always trusted him implicitly, but lately, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was being kept from her. Minutes later, the door opened and William stepped into her office, a folder clutched in his hand. He wore his usual air of confidence, but Emma couldn't help but notice the lines of stress around his eyes. "Good morning, Miss Thompson," he greeted, his voice warm but not entirely genuine. "What's on your mind today?" Emma straightened in her chair, crossing her arms over her chest. "I've been reviewing some of the quarterly reports. The numbers don't add up. There are discrepancies I can't ignore." "You're the head of operations. Can you explain this?" William placed the folder on her desk, his eyes flicking to the documents before meeting hers. "I understand your concerns, Emma," he said, leaning forward slightly. "But sometimes things get complicated. We're in a transitional period, and there's bound to be some volatility in the numbers. The market has been unpredictable lately." Emma wasn't convinced. "I've been looking at more than just the numbers, the rumors I'm hearing. The employee dissatisfaction, the issues with the marketing department, something doesn't sit right." William hesitated for a moment before offering a reassuring smile. "You're doing well, Emma. Your father would be proud. Don't worry about the rumors. Focus on the bigger picture. We've been through worse." Emma wasn't so sure. She had inherited a legacy, but that legacy now felt fragile. Her father had built this empire, but now, as she stood at the helm, she couldn't help but wonder whether it was built on a foundation of trust or a web of lies. Emma's internal thoughts. Emma watched William leave her office, his words echoing in her mind. He was too calm, too reassuring. She needed to know the truth. She couldn't afford to let this company slip through her fingers the way her father's legacy seemed to have slipped away from him. "I need to see things for myself. I need to know who's been pulling the strings behind the scenes." As the day wore on, Emma continued to grapple with her suspicions. She stared at the stack of reports in front of her, feeling the weight of the responsibility. It was clear that something was going on, something deep within the company, and the more she thought about it, the more she realized she couldn't trust anyone. Not even the people who had worked with her father for years. She needed to go undercover. Emma's internal dialogue: "If no one is going to tell me the truth, I'll find it myself. I'll go in as one of them. I'll see what's really going on behind the walls of Thompson Corp." Emma stood up abruptly, the decision made. It wasn't the most conventional approach, but she knew it was the only way to get the answers she needed. There was a place for an heiress, a CEO, Emma Thompson, the daughter of Richard Thompson, but there was no place for Sarah Johnson, the secretary. And so began the next chapter of her life, one that would lead her deep into the heart of a conspiracy that no one saw coming. Emma Thompson stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, the fake identity she had created staring back at her. Sarah Johnson, the name felt foreign on her tongue, but it was her key to infiltrating the very company she inherited. With her decision made, she had spent the past few days crafting a new persona, one that was unremarkable, someone easily overlooked. A temporary secretary position in the marketing department would be the perfect way to get in unnoticed. She checked her appearance one last time, ensuring that her clothes were modest and her hair neat. It wasn't the image of Emma Thompson, the heiress to the Thompson empire, that she wanted to project. Instead, it was Sarah, a regular woman looking for a temporary job to support herself. No ties, no expectations, just a blank slate. Emma's internal thoughts: "Come do this. I need to do this. The only way I'll get the answers I need is if I blend in." With a steady breath, she left the bathroom and headed to the conference room where her interview would take place. It felt strange to be walking into the very heart of the company she had grown up with, but she reminded herself that this was the only way. As she entered the room, she was greeted by Barbara Collins, the HR director, a woman who had worked for her father for years. Barbara's sharp gaze scanned Emma's appearance, and for a moment, Emma's heart raced. But she quickly masked her nervousness, adopting the soft, unassuming tone of Sarah Johnson. "Barbara Collins, your resume is practically non-existent. Why should we hire you?" Emma smiled, doing her best to appear confident. She knew that her lack of experience was glaring, but she also knew that people like Barbara were used to seeing polished resumes and grand statements. What they didn't expect was a woman willing to admit her limitations while showing a fierce determination to learn. "Emma, I know I don't have experience, but I'm willing to work hard and learn quickly. I'll do my best in any task given to me. I understand that it's a competitive environment, and I'm prepared to prove myself." Barbara arched an eyebrow, clearly assessing whether Emma was being genuine or just another desperate applicant. The tension in the room was palpable, but Emma stayed calm, her fingers lightly tapping the edge of the table as she maintained eye contact. She couldn't afford to falter now. Barbara Collins, "All right, you'll start tomorrow. Don't expect any special treatment." Emma held back the sigh of relief that almost escaped her lips. She had done it. She had secured the position in the marketing arrangement, her first step in uncovering the truth about what was really happening at Thomson Corp. As she stood to leave the interview, Barbara handed her a stack of papers. "These are the employee guidelines. We expect you to familiarize yourself with them immediately. We're a fast-paced department, so don't get too comfortable." Emma, "Of course. I'll review everything tonight." The door closed behind her as she walked out, her mind racing with both excitement and anxiety. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of her undercover mission, and she couldn't help but feel the weight of what she had just committed to. She wasn't just working in the marketing department. She was stepping into a world of secrets, lies, and corporate corruption. Emma's internal thoughts. "This is only the beginning. I need to be sharp. I have to find the cracks in this company, the things they're hiding from me. And then, I need to fix it." As she left the building and stepped into the cool night air, Emma made a promise to herself. She would expose the truth, no matter what it took. She had spent her entire life living in the shadows of her father's empire, but now it was her turn to step into the light, even if it meant wearing a mask. The path ahead was uncertain, but she was ready to face it head-on. Her father's legacy was on the line, and she would do whatever it took to protect it. The next day would be the first real test of her resolve. The following morning, Emma, now Sarah Johnson, walked through the doors of Thomson Corp. For the first time in her new role, the building felt colder today, its polished floors and sleek offices serving as a stark reminder of the world her father had built, the world she was now diving into with nothing but a fake identity and the desire for answers. Her first task, as expected, was menial, photocopying. She sat at a desk in the marketing department, the hum of the copy machine filling the air. It wasn't what she had envisioned for herself. Managing a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate was far more glamorous than sorting through stacks of papers, but she had no choice. This was her reality now, and every document, every conversation could reveal the corruption she suspected. Emma's internal thoughts. "This is what it's come to? I'm working here, doing these tasks, when I should be running the company." She glanced up at the busy executives who bustled around her in their tailored suits, exchanging pleasantries while Emma, now Sarah, quietly observed. The scene was a mixture of polished efficiency and tension, a far cry from the easy elegance of her childhood memories. She heard Martha, the department's executive assistant, laugh softly as she approached with a cup of coffee. Martha had a no-nonsense attitude that seemed to permeate the office, and as she handed Emma a coffee order, her eyes flicked over the documents Emma had been given to copy. "Martha, oh, Mr. Rivers is very demanding with his coffee. It has to be black, no sugar, at 65 degrees. If you mess it up, you'll know." Emma felt the knot tighten in her stomach. She had heard of Mr. Mark Rivers, the marketing director, but hadn't anticipated how micromanaged everything would be. To her, it seemed ridiculous to be worried about the temperature of coffee while the business was slowly unraveling behind closed doors. The monotony of the tasks continued: coffee, photocopying, scheduling meetings. But as the hours passed, Emma began to notice more subtle details that only deepened her suspicions. A conversation in the hallway caught her attention as she was making yet another cup of coffee for Mr. Rivers. Voice in the hallway. "Did you hear? Another round of layoffs is coming. They're cutting the marketing budget by 20%. The employees don't know it yet, but it's going to hit them hard." Emma froze, her hand still gripping the coffee cup. Her heart rate quickened, but she stayed still, pretending not to listen. The words echoed in her mind, a grim confirmation of the rumors she had been hearing. Cuts, layoffs, discontent. She had to know more. Emma's internal thoughts. How far does this go? How deep is the corruption? The employees are going to pay for this, but it's not just about the budget. Something more is happening here. After making the coffee, she hurried back to her desk. trying to ignore the rising tide of frustration and fear that was beginning to wash over her. Every conversation seemed to be pointing in the same direction. Things were falling apart at Thomson Corp, and no one was willing to admit it. As the day wore on, Emma found herself being pulled deeper into the web of corporate dynamics. She had hoped to remain invisible, to stay unnoticed as Sarah Johnson, but the more she overheard, the more she realized the scope of what was happening within these walls. The cuts weren't just financial, they were personal. She overheard one of the executives complaining about the unnecessary perks given to long-time employees. Another conversation involved discussions about firing dead weight without severance pay. The realization hit her with a gut punch. Her father's empire, the legacy he had worked so hard to build, was being dismantled from the inside, and she had no idea who was behind it or how to stop it. The more she learned, the more she wanted to confront those responsible. But she knew better than to act rashly. She had to keep her head down, bide her time, and gather evidence. Emma's internal thoughts. I need more than overheard conversations. I need proof. But how can I get it without raising suspicion? That evening, as she walked out of the building, Emma felt a new weight on her shoulders. She had been hoping for clarity, for answers, but all she had now were more questions. The deeper she dug, the murkier the waters became. The conspiracy was real. And it was only just beginning. It had been 2 weeks since Emma began her undercover work in the marketing department, and every day felt like a game of cat and mouse. She did her best to blend in, taking on every menial task, with the dedication of someone trying to prove themselves. However, as the days passed, her sense of unease deepened. The whispers she had overheard about the company's finances, the layoffs, and the budget cuts were only the surface of something far darker, and she was determined to get to the bottom of it. One afternoon, as Emma was organizing documents in a quiet corner of the office, a familiar voice caught her attention. It was Mark Rivers, the marketing director, speaking in hushed tones to Barbara Collins, the HR director. They had no idea Emma was within earshot, and they were too focused on their conversation to notice her presence. Barbara Collins, we need to be careful. Someone might be onto us. Emma froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't expected this. She leaned slightly forward, trying to remain unnoticed. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table, her breath shallow as she strained to hear every word. Mark Rivers, relax. No one can prove anything. We just have to wait until the deal goes through. Emma's mind raced. Deal? What deal? What were they talking about? The tension in the room was palpable, and Emma couldn't shake the sense that they were discussing something far more significant than just financial matters. She took a step back, hoping to retreat before she was noticed, but as she did, the sound of her foot brushing against the floor made a soft noise. She froze, praying they hadn't heard it. Mark's voice continued, low but urgent. Mark Rivers. Once the deal is finalized, everything will fall into place. We won't have to worry about a thing. Trust me. Barbara Collins. And money? Emma's breath caught in her throat. Money? What money? She had heard rumors about mismanagement, but this felt different. Her pulse quickened as the realization hit her. There was something far bigger going on. Something that went beyond mere budget cuts or employee dissatisfaction. Something they were hiding. Something they thought was safe. Mark Rivers. Don't worry, the money's already moving. We just need to keep things under control until the paperwork's signed. It's almost there. At that moment, a knot of anxiety tightened in Emma's stomach. She had suspected for days that there was something wrong, but this conversation confirmed it. The company wasn't just in financial trouble. There were illicit dealings happening. Money was being moved around behind the scenes, possibly to offshore accounts, possibly as part of some larger scheme. This was no ordinary corporate mismanagement. Emma and Sarah, what are they hiding? Her mind swirled with questions, and for a moment she felt paralyzed by the enormity of what she was hearing. Mark and Barbara's words were clear enough. A deal was in the works, one that had to remain hidden from everyone. And Emma knew that if she wanted to uncover the truth, she would need more than just overheard conversations. She needed proof. Emma's instincts kicked in. She quietly backed away from the conversation, her mind already turning over her next move. This wasn't just about protecting the legacy her father had built. It was about stopping a conspiracy that could destroy everything he had worked for, everything she had inherited. She had to find out what the deal was. She had to find out where the money was going, and she had to do it quickly before Mark and Barbara realized they were being overheard. Emma's internal thoughts. I've got them cornered. They don't know I'm onto them yet, but I need to move fast. This could be bigger than anything I've imagined. I'll have to get closer, dig deeper, but how? As Emma headed back to her desk, she glanced over her shoulder at the two conspirators, now walking in opposite directions. Her heart still raced, her mind racing with the implications of what she had just heard. The stakes had just gotten higher, and she couldn't afford to make a mistake. She had to be smart, strategic. She couldn't confront them yet. Not until she had concrete evidence, not until she had a clearer picture of what was really going on. For now, all she could do was bide her time, but deep down, Emma knew one thing for certain. The truth was closer than she thought, and she was going to find it, no matter the cost. A few days after overhearing Mark and Barbara's conversation, Emma found herself sinking deeper into the strange undercurrents of the company. She had managed to gather bits and pieces of information, but everything still felt fragmented, like a puzzle with too many missing pieces. The more she learned, the more she realized how much she didn't know, and it frustrated her. Every conversation, every document seemed to raise more questions than answers. One evening, after a long day of errands and office tasks, Emma decided to take a break. The office was quieter now, with most of the executives having left for the day. She walked through the empty hallways, trying to clear her head. As she turned a corner, she nearly bumped into Charlie, the janitor. Charlie was an older man who had been working at Thompson Corp for years. He was quiet, unassuming, and mostly kept to himself. Emma had noticed him cleaning the floors or taking out the trash, but it wasn't until that moment that their paths had crossed directly. Charlie paused, looking at Emma with a knowing expression in his eyes. Something in his gaze made Emma stop in her tracks, sensing that he had something to say. "Charlie, Sarah, be careful. This company, it's not the same anymore. Things are being hidden. Documents disappear. Employees are let go without reason. There's money that's not accounted for." Emma's heart skipped a beat. Her pulse quickened as she took a cautious step closer. She had heard rumors about corruption within the company, but this was different. Charlie, a man who had no reason to lie, was now speaking in hushed tones, his voice tinged with concern. What do you mean? What's really going on here?" Charlie glanced around nervously, his eyes darting to make sure no one was listening. The dim hallway felt heavy with the weight of his words. He lowered his voice, leaning closer to Emma, as if sharing a secret he had carried for too long. "Charlie, there's things I can't say out loud, but there's corruption. Things your father wouldn't have allowed." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. Her father. She had been trying to hold on to the idea that his legacy was untouched, that the company he built had remained as strong and honorable as he had intended it to be. But Charlie's words shattered that illusion, leaving her with an unsettling sense of unease. Emma's internal thoughts. Corruption. My father wouldn't have stood for it. So why didn't he stop it? Why didn't he see it coming? And what is he involved in, if anything? Charlie sighed, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of his knowledge was too much to bear. "Charlie, I've been here longer than most of the folks upstairs. I've seen things. Back when your father was in charge, this company ran with integrity. People knew their jobs and they kept their heads down, but now things have changed. Documents disappear, and when employees are let go, they don't even get a goodbye. There's whispers of deals being made in the shadows, and some people are getting rich off it. Your father never would have let this happen." Emma absorbed his words, her mind racing. She had already suspected that there was something foul happening beneath the surface, but hearing Charlie's confirmation made it all the more real. The corruption was no longer just rumors. It was happening in the heart of Thompson Corp, And her father, the man who had built this empire, might have been caught in the web, or worse, blind to it all. Is there any way to prove this? How do I stop it? Charlie hesitated, glancing around once more before speaking. His voice dropped to a near whisper. Charlie, there's more than just financial stuff going on, Sarah. People have been getting paid off to keep quiet. If you ask too many questions, you might get the same treatment. But if you're serious about uncovering the truth, you'll need more than what I can tell you. Emma's stomach tightened. Every instinct told her that she was on the edge of something huge. Charlie's warning wasn't just about company policy or financial discrepancies. It was about something much darker, the kind of corruption that ran deep, threatening to destroy everything her father had worked for. Emma's internal thoughts. I can't back down now, I've come too far. But how do I expose this? Who can I trust? Charlie paused for a moment before giving her a final piece of advice. Charlie, be careful, Sarah. People like Mark Rivers, he's not who he seems. And Barbara Collins, she's not as loyal as your father thought. If you're going to uncover the truth, you've got to be smart. Watch your back. With that, Charlie turned and disappeared down the hallway, leaving Emma standing alone in the empty corridor. She stared after him, her mind reeling with the weight of his words. He had just confirmed everything she had feared. There was more to this conspiracy than she had imagined, and the people she trusted were hiding it in plain sight. As Emma stood there, a wave of determination washed over her. She wasn't just going to stand by and watch her father's legacy crumble. She had a plan now, and she wasn't going to let anyone, no matter how powerful, get in her way. The truth was closer than ever, and Emma knew that with every step she took, the danger would only grow. Emma had always been meticulous, something she had inherited from her father, along with his sharp instincts. She knew that every detail mattered, every slip-up, every inconsistency could lead to the truth. But up until now, all she had were pieces, conversations, rumors, and half-formed suspicions. That was about to change. It was late in the afternoon when Emma found herself standing outside Mark Rivers' office. The company was quieter than usual. Most of the staff already gone home, and the dimming light cast long shadows across the hallway. Emma had spent days carefully observing Mark's habits, learning his routines, waiting for the right moment. Today, it seemed, the opportunity had presented itself. Mark had left his office door slightly ajar, a sign of his hurried exit. Emma hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding, but then she stepped forward. She had to be swift, no second chances. She slid inside, the room dark and quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. The desk was cluttered with papers, but Emma wasn't interested in the mundane details. Her eyes immediately fixed on the filing cabinet. It was slightly open, and a single folder protruded from its edge, almost as though it were waiting for her to find it. Her pulse quickened as she approached the drawer, scanning the contents of the folder. The document inside was thick, filled with financial figures and names, some of which she recognized, executives at Thompson Corp. But what caught her attention was the account number at the bottom, a series of large transfers to an offshore account. The numbers were staggering. Emma's hands trembled as she carefully lifted the paper from the folder, her eyes scanning every line, every figure. This wasn't just a few discrepancies or minor mismanagement. This was deliberate, calculated. The transfers spanned months, moving large sums of money out of the company with no legitimate explanation. Emma, whispering to herself as she takes photos. This is it. This proves it. But I need more. Who's behind all this? She quickly snapped pictures of the document with her phone, trying to capture every detail without shaking too much. Her mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle finally starting to fall into place. This was more than corporate greed. It was a conspiracy that had been carefully orchestrated, but as she read through the document, she realized that it wasn't just Mark. Someone else was involved, someone higher up the chain, someone who had the power to move money on this scale without raising suspicion. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just about exposing Mark Rivers, it was about exposing a network of corruption that ran deep within the company, and possibly beyond it. The question now wasn't just who was behind it, It was who else was involved, and how far did it go? As she continued to snap pictures, Emma's thoughts raced. I need to dig deeper. I need to find out who else has been profiting from this. I can't do this alone. I'll need help. Just then, a sound from the hallway broke her focus. The unmistakable click of footsteps approaching. Emma's heart lurched. She had to leave, and fast. She stuffed the document back into the folder, closed the drawer as quietly as she could, and rushed toward the door. As she slipped back into the hallway, she pressed herself against the wall, listening carefully. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Someone was walking by Mark's office. Emma held her breath, waiting for the footsteps to pass, praying she hadn't been caught. Finally, the sound faded, and Emma exhaled, the tension in her chest easing slightly. She had what she needed. The photos were clear, the evidence undeniable, but now she had to figure out what to do with it. She knew one thing for sure: the conspiracy was far bigger than she had imagined, and the more she uncovered, the more dangerous the game would become. As Emma made her way back to her office, her mind was spinning with the weight of the information she had just uncovered. She wasn't just dealing with a corrupt department head anymore. This was systemic, and now she had to decide how to bring it all to light without risking everything. The days following her discovery in Mark Rivers' office were filled with a sense of urgency and paranoia. Emma knew that the conspiracy was much larger than she had originally thought. The more she uncovered, the more dangerous things seemed to get. Every corner she turned led to another dead end, and every attempt to gather more information left her with even more questions. She knew she couldn't do this alone. It was early one morning when Emma received a cryptic message on her phone. No name, just a number, and a text that read, "We need to talk. It's about your father's company." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea who the message was from, but something in her gut told her that it was important. Without hesitation, she replied, agreeing to meet. A few hours later, she found herself in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city, nervously scanning the room for the person who had reached out to her. She had chosen this location deliberately, public, safe, and neutral. She couldn't afford to take any chances. Just as she was beginning to doubt the meeting, a woman approached her table. She was in her early 30s, dressed casually in a black jacket and jeans, her dark hair tied back in a ponytail. Andrea Vega. Emma Thompson, I presume? Emma nodded, not sure whether to be relieved or suspicious. The woman's tone was calm, but there was an edge of urgency in her voice. Andrea Vega. I'm Andrea Vega. I've been investigating your company for months now. We need to talk about what's really going on. Emma's mind raced, trying to process what was happening. She had no idea who Andrea was or why she was involved, but one thing was certain: this conversation could change everything. Emma, how do you know about me? About my father's company? Andrea sat down, glancing around the cafe before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. Andrea Vega. I was hired by a group of concerned shareholders. They've been watching the company for some time now, and they've started to suspect something is terribly wrong. The stock is being manipulated, the books are being cooked, and there's been talk of a hostile takeover. Emma's heart dropped. She had feared this, but hearing it out loud made the reality of it all hit her like a cold wave. A hostile takeover? By whom? Andrea leaned forward, her eyes intense, her tone serious. Andrea Vega. Some of the board members are in on it. Mark Rivers, Barbara Collins, people who should be loyal to the company and your family. They're planning to buy out Thompson Corp for a fraction of its worth by manipulating the stock value. They've been orchestrating this for months. Your father's legacy is being sold right out from under you. Emma felt a rush of disbelief and fury. How could they betray us like this? My father trusted them, built this empire with them. The anger simmered beneath the surface, but it was quickly replaced by an overwhelming sense of urgency. This wasn't just about her father's legacy anymore. It was about protecting everything that had been built, everything she had inherited. Emma, I can't believe this, Webajek. They want to sell my father's legacy. How could they betray us like this? Nick? Andrea's face softened slightly, but the urgency in her voice remained. Andrea Vega, we've already started the process, Emma. If you don't act fast, it'll be too late. The deal is already in motion and they're just waiting for the right moment to pull the trigger. But with your father's name on the line, you can't let this happen. You need to take control of the company before they finish what they've started. Emma sat back, the weight of Andrea's words settling heavily on her shoulders. She had thought the conspiracy was about money, about greed, but now she realized it was about much more. Her father's name, his legacy, and the future of Thompson Corp. Emma's internal thoughts. This is bigger than I imagined. They're trying to destroy everything my father built. I can't let them win. Looking at Andrea, Emma knew she had found an ally. Someone who had been working tirelessly to uncover the truth. Someone who could help her fight back. She had a long road ahead of her, but for the first time in weeks, Emma felt a spark of hope. Emma, what do we do next? Andrea leaned in, her expression resolute. Andrea Vega, we gather evidence. We stop the takeover, expose the corruption, and take back what's rightfully yours. But we have to move fast. Every minute counts. Emma nodded, the weight of the task ahead sinking in. This was no longer just about uncovering the truth. It was about taking back control. With Andrea's help, she might just have a chance. The moment Emma had been waiting for had arrived. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but it had to be done. The conspiracy was no longer just an abstract idea. It was real, and it was going to destroy everything her father had built. The longer she waited, the harder it would be to expose the truth. She had gathered her evidence, and now it was time to bring it all to light. With Andrea's help, Emma had obtained everything she needed: financial documents, emails, and detailed records of the transfers to offshore accounts. The evidence was undeniable, and now it was time to confront the people responsible. The board meeting was scheduled for noon, and Emma had been planning for this moment for days. She arrived at the boardroom early, wearing a composed expression, but her mind was racing. She had dressed as Sarah Johnson, the secretary, the same way she had infiltrated the company weeks ago. No one expected Emma Thompson to be there, but that was part of the plan. She needed to be underestimated, just like she had been from the start. She couldn't afford to walk in as the CEO. She needed to be invisible, to catch them off guard. As the meeting began, Emma quietly walked in and took a seat at the back of the room, blending in with the low-ranking employees. She observed Mark Rivers, Barbara Collins, and the other board members as they casually discussed their plans to move forward with the hostile takeover. The chatter around her continued, but Emma's mind was focused on the task at hand. She waited until the conversation began to take a turn toward the final stages of their plan. She had everything ready: the projector, the financial documents, the evidence. At the perfect moment, Emma stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. Silence fell over the room as everyone turned to her. Emma, I think it's time we had a conversation about what's been going on in this company. A murmur rippled through the room, but Emma stood her ground, her gaze fixed on the board members. Her heart raced, but she kept her voice steady, her resolve firm. This was it. There was no turning back now. Mark, Rivers, this is ridiculous. You can't just barge in here with these baseless accusations. The tension in the room was palpable as Mark stood up, trying to regain control of the situation. But Emma wasn't about to back down. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment. She had worked tirelessly to gather the evidence that would expose the corruption within Thompson Corp. And now she was ready to expose it all. Emma, actually, I can. And I will. The room went still as Emma walked over to the projector, her eyes never leaving Mark's. She clicked the remote, and the projector came to life, casting images of financial documents and emails onto the screen for everyone to see. The first image that appeared was a spreadsheet showing massive transfers to offshore accounts with clear indications of manipulation and fraudulent activities. Emma.com. These are the facts. Over the past few months, key members in this room have been diverting funds, manipulating reports, and preparing to sell the company. The board members froze, their faces paling as the damning evidence unfolded before them. Mark's face was flushed with panic, his eyes darting to the other members of the board. Barbara shifted uncomfortably in her seat, unable to meet Emma's gaze. The chaos had begun. Barbara Collins. This is nonsense. You're making a mistake. But Emma stood tall, her voice unwavering. Emma? I don't think so. These documents, these emails, they speak for themselves. You've been planning this for months, diverting funds and setting up a deal to sell Thompson Corp. for a fraction of its worth. You've been hiding the truth from everyone except me. The room erupted into chaos as the board members began to argue among themselves, some of them trying to deny the evidence, others frantically trying to cover their tracks. Mark stepped forward, his face red with fury. Mark, this is insane. You have no idea what you're talking about. But Emma was done listening. She had seen enough. She wasn't going to let them lie their way out of this. With the full weight of her father's legacy behind her, Emma spoke with authority. Emma, I know exactly what I'm talking about. You've betrayed my father's legacy, and you've been using this company for your own gain. But it ends now. The room was in turmoil as the board members scrambled to process the accusations, but Emma remained calm, her eyes locked on Mark and Barbara. The truth had been revealed, and there was no going back. The conspiracy was exposed, and Emma Thompson was taking back control. The chaos in the boardroom seemed to stretch on forever, but amidst the shouting and confusion, Emma's heart still raced. She had done it. She had exposed the corruption that had been festering at the heart of her father's empire. Mark and Barbara, the masterminds behind the scheme, stood frozen, their faces ashen, unable to deny the evidence that was projected on the screen. The room was thick with panic as some of the other board members scrambled to find a way to explain themselves. But Emma, resolute and calm, stood at the center, knowing that the truth was finally out. 2 minutes later, the sound of sirens echoed through the building, signaling the arrival of the police. As the officers entered the room, Mark and Barbara exchanged nervous glances, knowing their fate was sealed. The officers, led by Detective Ramirez, swiftly moved to arrest both of them. Mark, Rivers, you don't understand. This isn't what it looks like. But it was too late. The evidence was irrefutable, and the officers didn't hesitate. Mark was handcuffed and led out of the room, his face a mixture of disbelief and fear. Barbara, too, was taken away, her protests falling on deaf ears. The boardroom was left in stunned silence, with the remaining executives too terrified to speak. However, as the dust began to settle, Emma felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had just witnessed the downfall of two of the people who had been responsible for the plot to steal her father's legacy. Yet, a part of her couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was lurking beneath the surface. The conspiracy had been exposed, but was it over? As she stood alone in the boardroom, reflecting on the events, she was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Detective Ramirez entered, a serious expression on his face. Detective Ramirez. Miss Thompson, I need to speak with you. Emma nodded, motioning for him to proceed. She had expected this meeting, knowing that the police would be investigating the full extent of the conspiracy. But what Ramirez said next made her blood run cold. Detective Ramirez, we've found something else, something you might not have expected. Among the documents we seized from Mark and Barbara's offices, there were also papers signed by your father, Richard Thompson. Emma's heart stopped. She had worked tirelessly to protect her father's legacy, convinced that he had been a victim of the corruption, just like her. The idea that her father might have been involved in any way was unthinkable. She couldn't fathom it. Emma. No, my father wouldn't have been a part of this. There's got to be an explanation. Her voice cracked with emotion, but Detective Ramirez's face remained grim. He pulled out a folder and opened it, revealing a series of documents that had been signed by Richard Thompson himself. As Emma scanned the papers, her eyes fell on a series of notes, all pointing to the fact that her father had been aware of the corruption at the highest levels, at least in the years leading up to his death. Detective Ramirez. These documents suggest that Richard Thompson was aware of the corruption network. He may have been trying to dismantle it, but there's no way of knowing for sure. The information we've uncovered suggests that he was planning to expose the entire operation before his untimely death. Emma's mind raced. She felt the weight of the accusation settle heavily on her chest. Her father, the man who had built Thompson Corp. From the ground up, who had been a symbol of integrity and strength. Was it possible that he had been part of something so sinister? Emma's internal thoughts. How could he have known? Why didn't he tell me? Why didn't I see it? My father was always so careful, so protective. If he knew about the corruption, why didn't he stop it? Emma felt the crushing weight of grief and disbelief. It wasn't just about exposing Mark and Barbara anymore. It was about confronting the possibility that her father, her hero, had been tangled in a web of corruption that had consumed the company. It was a bitter pill to swallow, and one she wasn't sure she could ever fully accept. Emma, bet, why would he allow this to happen? Was he involved in it, or was he trying to stop it? Detective Ramirez shook his head. Detective Ramirez, we don't have all the answers yet. We need to dig deeper. But there's a chance your father was trying to bring this down, which might explain why he was killed. It wasn't an accident, Emma. Your father may have been silenced before he could expose everything. The words hit Emma like a physical blow. The possibility that her father had been murdered because of what he knew left her reeling. She had spent her entire life believing in her father's righteousness, only now to discover that there was a darker side to him that she could never have imagined. Emma's internal thought. This can't be real, but if it is, if he was trying to stop them, I need to know the whole truth. I owe it to him. As the reality of her father's possible involvement in the conspiracy sank in, Emma realized that her fight was far from over. The conspiracy went deeper than she had thought, and there were still many unanswered questions, but she was determined to uncover every last detail, no matter how painful it might be. With newfound resolve, Emma knew that she had to continue her father's fight. The truth needed to be exposed, no matter the cost, and she wouldn't stop until every last secret was uncovered. After the arrest of Mark and Barbara and the unsettling revelations about her father, Emma found herself grappling with the weight of truth in ways she never imagined. The fight for Thompson Corp wasn't over, far from it. She was only just beginning to understand the scale of the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed everything her father had worked for. Yet one question lingered in her mind, unanswered and haunting. Why did her father die? The car accident that had taken his life wasn't a mere coincidence, but a carefully orchestrated act to silence him. It was Ernest Vidal, a former friend of her father's, who came forward with the truth. Ernest had been a quiet presence in her father's life, a man with connections to people who moved in the shadows of society's elite. Emma had known of him, but had never truly understood the depth of his involvement until now. She met him at a small, nondescript cafe just outside the city, away from prying eyes. Ernest sat across from her, his face tired but resolute. His once sharp eyes seemed clouded by the weight of years, yet there was a fire in them as he spoke, one that burned with a quiet urgency. Ernest Vidal. Your father wasn't corrupt, Emma. He was trying to bring down the organization that's been running this country for years. They found out, and that's why they killed him. Emma sat in stunned silence, the room spinning around her. Her father, a man she had revered as a pillar of integrity, had been embroiled in a fight far larger than she had ever realized. He hadn't been part of the corruption. He had been trying to expose it. The realization struck her like a tidal wave. Her father had been more than just a businessman. He had been a warrior in his own right, fighting to dismantle an insidious force that reached into every corner of power. Emma whispering in disbelief. He was trying to stop them. He was fighting them all along? Ernest nodded gravely. He leaned forward, his voice low but firm, as if he had been waiting for this moment for years. Ernest Vidal. Yes, Richard Thompson knew exactly what was going on. He uncovered a network of corruption that went beyond corporate greed. It was a global operation using companies like Thompson Corp as pawns. He was preparing to expose them when they found out. The words sank in. The man who had taught Emma everything about business, who had built an empire from nothing, had been fighting against a shadowy network that had far more power than she could ever have imagined. The car accident that had taken his life was no accident. It had been a hit, an execution designed to stop him before he could expose the truth. And now, Emma was in their crosshairs. Emma, what do I do now? How do I stop them? Ernest's eyes darkened, and for the first time, Emma saw the real danger in his expression. Ernest Vidal, they know you're getting too close. They know you have access to the information your father collected. They'll come for you, Emma. You need to act quickly. But you're not alone. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. She wasn't just fighting to save her father's legacy anymore. She was fighting for her own survival. But Ernest's last words offered a sliver of hope in the storm. She wasn't alone. There were people out there who had been working alongside her father, waiting for the right moment to strike back. She just needed to find them, to build the network her father had once envisioned. Emma's internal thoughts. My father fought and died for this cause. He never gave up, no matter how dangerous it became. Neither will I. The realization hit her like a thunderclap. This was bigger than the company, bigger than even her father's legacy. It was about stopping a system that thrived on secrecy, corruption, and lies. Emma was now part of something much greater, a fight that would take everything she had. And, just as her father had before her, she was willing to face the darkness head-on. As Emma left the cafe, the cool night air biting at her skin, she felt an unexpected sense of clarity. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger, but she was no longer afraid. She had the truth now. She had the strength to carry it. Her father had spent his life trying to expose the rot at the heart of the system, and now it was her turn to finish what he had started. The battle for Thompson Corp was just the beginning. Emma knew that, but she also knew that with every step forward she was honoring her father's memory. Not just by protecting the empire he built, but by fighting to bring justice to those who had taken his life. With the truth as her weapon, she was ready to take on the world, and she wouldn't stop until every last piece of the conspiracy was exposed. Emma, to herself, this is just the beginning. I will finish what my father started. I will see this through. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Emma knew exactly what she had to do, and nothing, not even the danger ahead, would stand in her way. The media frenzy had been building for days, and Emma could feel the pressure mounting as she continued her fight against the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed her father's legacy. The truth had been exposed, but the battle was far from over. She had collected the evidence, she had confronted the culprits, and she had made it clear that she would stop at nothing to see justice done. But the more she pushed forward, the more dangerous it became. Emma's resolve was tested as she found herself standing before a crowd of reporters, cameras flashing in her face, her heart pounding in her chest. It was supposed to be a moment of triumph. After all, the corruption had been laid bare, and the public was finally starting to take notice. But in that very moment, everything came crashing down. Without warning, the police appeared, their sirens wailing in the distance. They moved in swiftly, surrounding her as they read off charges she knew to be false. Her breath caught in her throat. False charges? The irony wasn't lost on her. She had exposed the lies and deceit of those in power, and now they were using the very same tactics to silence her. Before she knew it, Emma was surrounded, her arms restrained as she was led away in front of the crowd. The cameras clicked incessantly, capturing every moment, but Emma wasn't afraid. She had come too far to back down now. As she was shoved into the back of a police car, her eyes caught a glimpse of something, or rather, someone in the crowd. There, standing among the journalists, was Andrea Vega, her face calm but resolute. For a moment, Emma's heart skipped a beat. Andrea, the ally who had helped her through so much, was there, signaling to her with a small nod, letting Emma know that the fight was far from over. It was a moment of solidarity, a silent promise that she wasn't alone in this battle. "Andrea, don't worry, the fight's not over yet." The words were a lifeline, and Emma clung to them with every ounce of her being. As the car doors slammed shut, Emma's mind raced, but her heart was filled with determination. The conspirators had underestimated her, just as they had her father. They thought that by silencing her, they could end the fight. But Emma knew the truth, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it away from her. Emma, to herself, "I'll never give up. I'll make sure the truth comes out." Her words were a promise, not just to herself, but to her father's memory, to the people who had trusted her, and to everyone who had been hurt by the corruption that had taken hold of Thompson Core. The battle had escalated, and it had taken a personal toll. But Emma wasn't backing down. In that moment, as the police car sped off toward an uncertain future, Emma understood that this wasn't just a fight for the truth. It was a fight for justice, for the legacy her father had built, and for everything he had tried to protect. She had already exposed the lies. Now, she had to make sure they couldn't escape the light. As the car moved further away from the crowd, Emma's resolve hardened. She had come too far to turn back now. The road ahead would be difficult, perhaps even dangerous, but she knew that the truth, no matter how powerful the enemies were, would always find its way to the surface. The final twist wasn't the arrest. It was the realization that the fight would continue, no matter what. With the truth in her hands, Emma knew that she was the last line of defense. There was no turning back, and she would make sure the full conspiracy was exposed, regardless of the cost. She had taken on the darkness, and she would see it through to the very end. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. Emma's internal thought: "This is just the beginning. I won't stop until every last truth is revealed. I'll see this through to the end." And as the weight of the world pressed down on her shoulders, Emma knew one thing for certain: the truth was unstoppable.